afternoon. We are now live for the first schools forum of the academic year. Unfortunately, we are not quorate today, so we will be unable to make any formal decisions. However, the forum is still able to discuss items in an advisory capacity. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Tim Griffith, from Sue Butler, and from Gareth Croxon. The second item on the agenda is election of chair. Unfortunately, as we are not quorate, we can't elect a chair for the municipal year. However, we can elect a chair for this meeting. So can I ask if anyone's happy to nominate anyone to be chair of this meeting?
I'm happy to nominate Liz.
Thank you.
Can I ask, is that seconded?
I'll second.
Thank you. And therefore, I think unless there are any other nominations, Liz, you are chair for this meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Do I need to do appointment of vice chair for the meeting, or are we happy just to carry on?
No, you don't need to do vice chair.
Okay, does anybody have declarations of interests before we get going? Anybody want to declare interest? Any peculiar interest?
Yeah, I think I have to declare an interest. I think if you're ahead, it's very difficult not to declare an interest, but I'll declare an interest as a maintained secondary school. It features in more than one agenda item today.
Thank you, Keith. So we're going to move on with some of the papers. We're going to comment on them. We have no...
Sorry, Liz, I don't know whether I'm formally here or not, but I would echo what Keith has said. I haven't had a chance to fully read all the papers because I only saw them, they came through last night, but they haven't been sent out. It was Keith sending them through, but I am just saying what Keith has said.
And they are publicly available, Kate, so thank you very much for that. So we have the pleasure to welcome Kate here as a head teacher on the team, and we need to accept some resignations for people who've either retired or moved on. So we want to say thank you to Trudy Salmons, to Caroline Johnson, to Kat Forrester, and to Katie Moore for their service on Schools Forum, and I think that's part of the reason why we have transition. So in advance, thank you to all the people who've put together the papers for tonight. There's a lot of reading to always pull together for the papers, and we're going to go down first off to minutes and matters arising. So
I would say, Liz, because we're not quorate, we can't approve them. So
I'm just looking at any actions and just making sure we've pulled them through. We can't approve them, but it's making sure. So we were going to be talking and discussing about whether the final proposals of the high needs budget was with appropriate arrangements, and I know that's in the paper today, but we can't agree on that as we're not quorate. Other than that, I can't see anything else that was pulled through as actions to discuss. Am I right?
I don't believe there were any others, no.
Okay, let's go on to agenda item 6, which is talking about the maintained schools budget for 25-26. Who's presenting on this?
I'll present on that, Liz. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and welcome to you, Matt, because you are joining. Do you want to explain who you are and what you're doing here?
So I am the Deputy Finance Business Partner for Children, Young People and Learning, I think the longest job title I've ever had. I started in the end of May, beginning of June, so I sat in the background, I think, at the last Schools Forum. But my role encompasses the sort of financial management and oversight and support for children, young people and learning. So education, children's social care, and a few other bits and pieces that fall within that remit.
Thank you so much. You pulled together this paper, and I know that your boss Nicholas is here to help us with any of the finance, but you're actually presenting this paper.
I'll present it, yeah.
Thank you very much.
So let me just bring it up so I can see what I'm talking about. As you'll see, the report on the budget plans for maintained schools for this year. You may recall, I think at the June meeting, there was a discussion about the balances held by schools at the end of the last financial year. And I think it was noted that over the 2 years, schools balances or maintained schools balances had fallen by about £1 million. From the budget plans we received this year, there's a further sort of expectation, there's a fall of about £750,000, which is quite a significant movement, as I'm sure you'll appreciate. Within that, there is a combination of schools with deficits, and they total about £1.1 million in deficits, and those are offset by the, unfortunately, slightly smaller number of schools that hold surpluses. So the total figure that's held for the deficit is ultimately a deficit of about £430,000 across schools' reserves. That's assuming all the budget plans come to fruition as they have been set out, so on. And again, we've put into this report some of the actions, some of the steps we'll take to support schools that might be looking at deficit this year or still not recovered from deficits from previous years. That presents, in terms of the deficit situation, presents a conversation that Nicholas and I are going to have in terms of how that reflects in the council's accounts. And I think it does operate on an individual school basis. I'm sure you'll be aware that schools carry forward any reserve, any balances or any surpluses or any deficits from one year to the next. And that would be an individual, but in terms of the overall council accounts, that deficit will sit there, and we're working at how the accounting works for that. As you can see from analysis Annex A, we've given a very brief summary of the school's figures from there. And I need to apologise to Keith. I've got the opening balances for Garth Hill slightly wrong. I missed off the reserves held by the ASD, the resource units, and they should be about £37,000 higher. And my apologies, Keith. I spoke to Lynn about it earlier today, and we'll update our records accordingly. As you can see, and worth noting as well, just for clarification, those figures that are in red with a negative number represent surplus balances. And I've followed a model that I think Bracknell follows in terms of presenting those numbers. I know it'll be a conversation. I'm seeing school bursars and business managers tomorrow, and we'll work out if there's a better way of presenting those numbers, as it were, to make slightly more sense as a sort of visual aid. But as you can see, there's a lot of movement. Those schools that ended last year in surplus continue to be in surplus, but those schools that ended last year in a deficit, whilst one school is going to break even, is suggesting it will clear the deficit entirety, others either remain in deficit, either growing or getting smaller. And obviously that's a cause for concern. The sort of financial sustainability of schools is a sort of paramount importance to the council. And we therefore need to sort of think about the steps taken. And we've put into the reports some of the actions that we're going to take to sort of address those. The first was a sort of preliminary budget analysis that we did for schools and deficits. That was to look at what their budget plan was for this year, what their budget plan was for last year, and their budget plans, their actuals for last year, just to see if there's anything that's radically changed and maybe they'd slipped to zero or decimal point in the wrong direction or something. Unfortunately, none of those errors have happened, and we've got that information. We're sort of coordinating how we pull that together. We are updating the monitoring requirement for schools, and this was, I came in the end of May and sort of surprised a little bit, I think, about the monitoring returns, and that people found the deficit balance situation at the end of the financial year a bit of a surprise. So we're sort of reinforcing that, and as a separate report on what our expectations will be for that. Again, obviously we'll focus on those that have deficits with a sort of greater degree of scrutiny than those that don't. But it's important that monitoring continues to be there. In order to support those schools with deficits, we're looking to put together what I've sort of schools and education finance board. That would be myself and colleagues from finance team, Dwayne and colleagues from education, colleagues from HR, so we can have those discussions with head teachers and governors about the actions that might need to be taken, and so on. And coordinating that as a response and making sure there's seeing what patterns might exist elsewhere across the borough, but also tailoring that support as needed. The other step we're going to take is we're going to ask the DfE to invite what's called school management resource advisors to undertake reviews of schools. These are not audits. Audits would look at the controls in place. These are school business professionals, either operating in maintained schools or academies, or people who have sort of range of experience in schools finance, go into schools to look at their budget plans to see where they are, what actions they might take. Sometimes that might be things such as, your photocopier contract is vastly overpriced. Other times it may be in terms of more greater focus on staffing levels and so forth. And the DfE have had this program in place for a number of years, and I think the reports I've seen have been very useful in terms of identifying areas to focus on. They'll a good report will sometimes tell you the potential savings value that might be taken from the action they propose or they recommend. And what we'll do is, I say, we'll target those schools, the largest deficits in the first instance, but we'll look to roll this forward for all schools, all maintained schools in the borough. Academies are able to undertake this themselves anyway. And again, what I'm hoping is either that we might find sort of patterns that warrant further investigation across the borough and so forth. The other area we're going to look at is we're going to ask, and again, this will apply, I think, to all schools, is just that the SEND funding. I know it was discussed at the last meeting in terms of the level of funding that goes into schools, and the question is how is that spent? So we'll tailor a sort of process and steps towards that, so we can pull that. Obviously, the high needs block and the safety valves are sort of key areas and key issues for Bracknell. So the intention would be to sort of align that and bring that into some of those sort of conversations. But yes, further work to be done. Yes, and a sort of a worrying movement, I think. Not unique. I think there's many schools across the country are finding the budgets and balances very challenging this year. I'm not expecting any miracles from the budget that comes in the autumn, and our expectation and requirement as stewards of public finances to manage these things within the resources we've got. Undoubtedly, some of the steps we'll take will hopefully help and address some of these, and we need to manage that. There's a sort of ongoing, there is a risk to the local authority in terms of deficit balances sit with the local authority, and it's our duty to sort of maintain that public sector, public procurement and finance process to make sure that's robust. Are there any questions?
I'm sure there will be comments, and I'm sure there will be questions. I'll hand over to the team, please. Keith starts off.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matt, and for clearing up. My first question was going to be in relation to the data, but I'll leave that between you and Lynn. But at least we've brought it to your attention. Yeah. I don't know whether you want me to ask a question about the SEND funding now or later in this meeting, because I do have a question about the proposal in respect of breaking down how high needs funding is going to be, how it is allocated in our schools, how it is being utilised in our schools. And I think we would all as head teachers want a better understanding of what you envisage there, please.
I think one aspect will be, again, I think the SRMA visits, there's a sort of an analysis that they will do in terms of staffing levels and levels of SEND in schools. One of the issues we need to do, and I think I will try and do this for Bracknell schools as a whole or maintained schools, is that benchmarking to see what the situation is across our family of schools. And that will hopefully might drive areas to further review and investigation. I don't know what the answer is in terms of the specifics. We still, I think, want to find that mechanism that works, offers helpful advice to schools themselves, but also informs the picture for the local authority.
Yeah, Matt, my general reaction to reading this paper was, okay, I can see this is supportive and its intent is to be helpful, but what my concern would be is whether that would put then undue pressure on colleagues here and add to the burden of workload, particularly when I read 6.18 and 6.19 and wanting a clear understanding of just what would be required from schools. But I straight away can envisage this taking a lot of time to break that down. I've already had a few discussions with head teachers. We're quite accustomed to present provision maps. Is that, you think, something that could be helpful in this process, or is it not put by pupil approach?
I think it is helpful. I think it's part of the information that exists out there as well. And clearly, each school will have maybe their own way of preparing provision map. Clearly, this is where, how do you support individual pupils and young people? And whilst those aren't always explicitly costed, I sort of understand the nature of support is more fluid sometimes in the nature of schools. I think that's a good step towards that.
I think it would need we'd need a discussion with all head teachers, I think, to be sure exactly what you want from us, and for us to be clear with you about the undertaking that would be required, because I would be concerned that this might, I'm concerned generally about how this might create additional work, but I'd be very worried about creating additional work for the very people in our schools who are probably feeling the pressure more than any others, our SENCOs and people who work in the SEND teams, and they're struggling as it is to find the capacity to deal with you know, the churn of administration that's required for, you know, the provision of SEND in our schools. First and foremost, we want those people to be working with the young people, but that's becoming harder and harder.
I think that's very wise. Kate, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just sort of following on from what Keith has said. If this is what the this group of people is asking for schools to be producing costed provision maps, can this be something that is joined up with the local authority in terms of the SEND team and then the SEND officers within Zoe's team, Tracy Bradshaw, to make sure our SENCOs are having the same message? Because where the trouble comes is when we are given information, then SENCOs are given slightly different information, and then the SEND team are given information that actually we end up all doing lots of work that is not joined up. I don't think people would be opposed to costed provision maps, but they were doing that before before the banding matrix came in for a purpose, whereas we'd have to know that the work that is being asked of our staff is actually for a purpose, not just an admin task. And I think the other point I just wanted to add to that is I know I haven't had a lot to do with the NAHT at the moment, but I think unions would question the workload that this would then put onto senior leaders. So I think we'd need to consider that carefully.
Thank you, Kate. Rachel, your hand went up.
Yeah, hi. A couple of questions. There's obviously an overlap between this and the next item where it talks about the monitoring. But the school resource management, that process of getting those people in, how onerous is that for schools? Because obviously in the next section, talking about monitoring, you're talking about schools with a deficit having to report accounts every month, which is another administrative task for them. Are we going to be inundating them with all these processes to get on top of, which is going to cause them more work, all at the same time? And my other question was, when you talk about the School and Education Finance Board, you talk about education and learning, finance and human resources in it. It should also have some representation for site management, because obviously buildings budget and everything is really important, and that doesn't seem to have been factored in.
I can certainly include colleagues who have knowledge of the premises side of things and sort of capital aspects as well.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not the intention to create additional burdens in terms of the responding to Keith and Kate about the EHCP, the sort of funding and expended there. I think that absolutely has to be done in consultation and joined up with schools, and it needs to be helpful to schools. I think it needs to be contribute to your understanding of how finances are moving around and sort of those aspects of it. In terms of the monitoring requirements, I think I go back to the, I appreciate it's an increase in requirement. I think most schools are already, I would hope and expect, monitoring their budgets on a regular basis. The requirement is to share that with the local authority, and that's the sort of a new step. If there's any that aren't monitoring frequently, then that would be a cause for concern. But I suspect some form of monitoring happens everywhere, and I'll be working with business managers to determine what's the format of that and how do we use the systems we have in place at the moment already exist to sort of make that process more straightforward, without creating without creating too many new wheels, as it were.
Thank you, Matt. Back over to Kate. You have another question?
It's not a question, it's more of a comment from Rachel's comment about the monitoring. I just know some feedback from heads that are in a deficit position that they have historically asked for support from the local authority, the finance team, on how to help and improve their budgets. And I know that has perhaps been lacking in the past. And actually then to have, I'm not suggesting there's been a heavy-handed approach coming in now, but actually when schools have wanted something and not got it, and then are now in a really quite rigorous monitoring process, which I don't disagree if you've got a deficit budget, but actually it's about helping schools rather than just be the stick to beat them with, because we are sort of beaten with sticks in from every angle, you know, everywhere, that actually it needs to be not adding more pressure to an already pressurized sort of situation. And I think heads, if it's one thing that keeps heads awake at night is school budgets now, and you go into a headship, you don't necessarily have all the training around finances. That's the thing that is lacking in your training. It's not in an NPQH or anything. So actually it's around packages of support for new heads or current heads that maybe are not as experienced with budgets, to help them understand to get better, rather than just sort of, well, we're going to come and monitor every month and things. So
thank you very much. I was quite pleased with 6.13 reviews, looking at the range of information for the financial data, the key metrics, the overall using the integrated curriculum financial planning tools that the government have produced. But I think you're right. I think, Rachel, your comment on the site, I don't think we should just say that everything's just focusing on the SEN, because that will create more pressures. Is there elements of alignment with staffing, and that I think it's quite wise to have the HR teams in there, because it could be that a longer term adjustment for staffing is needed, and that will need implications on bandings and hours, and all of these things need to be considered. But I would quite like, I know we can't offer recommendations because we're not core, but I would quite like to see, in the same way that we offer protections at the end of the year, we've always seen which schools have got surpluses and what they're planning to do with it. I'd quite like to see the sort of the breakdown, potentially, not in complete detail, but what sort of areas have led to some of these big numbers of deficits. So maybe it's 50% SEN, or staffing, or like their roof is falling in, or they've had to have crisis planning management. All of those things, I think there would be categories. So, Rachel, I'll let you come in first, as your hand went up first, and then I'll pass over to you, Matt.
Yeah, just a couple of things. If we're looking at some staff en masse from a Bracknell Forest perspective, there's potential for grants or mass contracting, you know, for bigger contracts over more than one school, so we can save funds from that perspective. The other thing, following on from what you've said, the Appendix A literally is just very basic information, but it would be interesting to see how it breaks down from pupil premium and SEN data, and also whether any of those schools are impacted with the additional free childcare hours, if they've got early years, or that if any of them are running any of the free breakfast clubs and having financial impact from that, because that's going to have a bigger impact on their budget, which wasn't necessarily anticipated. So it'd be good to see who's impacted by that as well.
Super, thank you very much. Matt, come back to you.
Absolutely. I think I firmly believe in the local management of schools. I think schools are best placed to make decisions about how they serve their communities, and I think that sort of informs the process and the steps I want to take. My experience of working in schools is testament to that. I think in terms of, I thought it was an interesting point about the early years and how that has had a knock-on effect, and I know personally as a school governor it's a challenging situation that like the school I work with faces. Each school, I think every school is unique anyway. I think each school's response and situation is unique, and whilst there may be sort of, I think, broad commonality across them. I suspect actually sometimes it'll be a multiple factors in each, multiple things in one school are different in another school, and so on. And that's why I think that the board is there to speak to those individual schools and say, well, we understand your circumstances of this and X, Y, and Z, and the response should be A, B, and C. But those are not the same in other schools. But it allows us as a local authority to sort of coordinate our understanding of that situation.
Thank you, Dwayne. I'll take your hand and then we'll move on.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I know the Schools Forum asked me last year to start some work, and that work has started on the small school strategy, because we do know we have schools with falling PAN numbers as well, but also we are working on updating the sufficiency of school-based planning as well. So there's a lot of work behind the scene. I know Richard has got a meeting set up, but again, I can bring that work. I will bring it to the heads briefings, but again, that work in terms of what does it mean with our PANs. There's a piece of work going on at the moment with mine, a consultancy agency that we've brought in to undertake an assessment for us, which is looking at population over the next 10 years as well. So, all that will factor in. I just don't want to think it's just about budgets. It is about our children and the falling numbers of children across the borough as well. So I think, I think the data is important here as well, and to put into context for some schools in terms as we move through the changes. But just want to update there, Liz, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, very much appreciated. Right, and then we're on to agenda item 7. So this is talking about the budget monitoring proposals for 25-26. Again, we don't have chance to vote on the recommendations, but I'll leave you a chance to read them after Matt has presented the papers, and then we'll have time to make commentaries on that for this evening. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. As mentioned, budget monitoring is a sort of crucial part of financial management in any organisation, and we are looking to sort of how do we tailor that. And again, I was surprised to join Bracknell and find that the information hadn't ever been utilised. I'm thinking, going back to the point raised earlier about when schools have asked for support, that not necessarily being as forthcoming as we would, perhaps it should have been, or we would like it to be. There's obviously a resource issue there, but we will utilise the information that schools provide us to sort of respond to it. I'm very firm of the belief that if we ask for schools for information, we need to do something with it and determine what that means. As we've sort of said, the proposal is that schools with surplus balances sort of continue on the quarterly monitoring process, but schools with deficits or in deficit or coming out of deficits prepare monthly monitoring. And to go back to that point about the sort of administrative burden, I think I'm seeing school business managers tomorrow, and I want to engage them in that discussion about what's the best way of doing this. How do we have the information? What information does Bracknell share with them? What information do they have locally? And how do we make this as smooth a process as possible? I'm mindful what I'm looking to avoid is 18 different pieces of paper in different formats that sort of give a solution. But I don't think it's too far to go in terms of coordinating that and getting to a solution that sort of hits all the right points. And that's what we'll be looking to achieve from this proposal, from this report.
Thank you very much. So, thanks, Matt, for putting yourself on mute. Rachel, your hand came up first.
Hey, thank you. So one of my questions was there a clear submission process and the format, which you've just said you're going to be discussing tomorrow? Another one, schools that aren't in deficit that report on a quarterly basis, if they start to show a slip, is there going to be an ongoing review that they might then have to change to monthly? And how would that be handled if they are starting to change from their predicted budgets? And the other thing was looking at 6.6 with your table with the plan, with the monthly supports, you've got that they're going to give a monthly submission, and then there will be a post-report review meeting once it's been reviewed. That's going to have to be quite a quick turnaround, isn't it, to have that report in for them to have a meeting to give any feedback, because they're then going to be working on their next monthly report. So logistically, are all those things going to be timetabled early on in the year so people know what they're doing? And is that going to be feasible from your side, from Bracknell Forest side, to be able to review meetings with all these schools every month once they've been submitted? There's quite a lot of admin both sides, isn't there?
Yes, there is, but I think it's I think it's important. I think the situation as it's moved to this past 12 months warrants that sort of greater focus. We will design. My intention is to design systems that allow us to very quickly take the information provided by schools and understand what it means. And I think that if schools are on track for the recovery plans, or their things are on track, I think that's allows us to say, once we understand what those plans are, or to say, yes, carry on, everything seems to be going okay, as it were. Where a school suddenly finds its situation worsening, I think, and if they were previously quarterly monitoring, I think we would probably need to review with them and have that discussion with them about what that steps needs to be taken. It isn't something I'd want to ignore, but I think it would depend on a sort of school by school basis. In that sense, does that answer your question? I think
Yeah, all I was just thinking is with your monthly submissions, they've got to submit it. Somebody's then got to review it. You've then got to hold a review meeting. If that's like a 2-3 week cycle, you're then coming up to your next month. You're kind of chasing your tail a bit, unless it's very, very quick, isn't it?
I think the meetings may be more straightforward in the, what has changed, why has this changed, how do you think this change might happen, impact on future situation. I'm envisaging that with business managers, but we're welcome, and I've already started discussions with various head teachers and governors in some schools to sort of move that forward. But I think it depends on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Keith, over to you.
Thanks. Matt, I think tomorrow your discussion with business managers in respect of timings is going to be, I'd be very interested to hear what they've got to say. So I'm looking at the timings for a school that's not in deficit. As a school that's not in deficit because we asked for, and the LA kindly agreed to, an extension to the deadline for submitting our budget to you. And that period of extension was absolutely critical in us then presenting a balanced budget with a very, very small surplus. And on the 15th of April 2026, I know we are going to be absolutely in the thick of that planning. So that's my hesitation. 15th of October, 6th of January, yeah, I can't see being any problem with that. But it's where we will be in terms of our budget planning cycle and the activities going on at that time that causes me to question how much of practical help that will be at that time that you've scheduled. And I'd be happy to have that discussion with you offline as well. But I just think, I don't know how many schools in your report submitted late because they had an approved budget extension. That's a question. That is a good question. I am asking that question, Matt. How many schools submitted late budgets with approval?
A large number. Most of those schools with deficits submitted late budgets later than normal. Others, child in deficits such as yourselves, also requested that extension. And I think that's been one of the challenges, is that information came in July, and it's only up until September in terms of understanding, analysing that information. I think that the April intention is that we'll be closing our financial accounts at that point in time, and it's just measuring what has happened for the year against what the plan was, or the last plan, and why might things have changed, which again schools will be doing in terms of their budget building process, if something happens in February, you'll factor that into your budget for the next year, sort of thing.
Sure.
And so that's the alignment with year end rather than a whole.
Yeah, I understand that. It's just because we're all working really to a Whitsun deadline for resignations in our schools. The normal budget planning cycle that aligns to a financial year isn't helpful, in my view, in terms of school budget setting in reality. And that's why the extension has been a godsend for us, I think, for the last 5 consecutive years. I'm happy to have that discussion with you further, because I just think it's useful. And if the meetings help to identify that, in February, March, whatever, that will be helpful too, sure.
I'd welcome that. That'd be very useful. Thank you.
Kate, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just have a question, and it could be the fact that I'm new and don't understand the tables fully, but it was a question about Annex A, the summary of balances. How is the figure in the closing balances 25 to 26? How have you reached those figures?
Those are the figures. We have taken the closing balances from schools, identified what their net expenditure is during the year, from their budget plans, what the net expenditure is during the year, and taken one from the other.
Okay, thank you.
What I was reading it as was that we had around 330,000, 25, 26, and we're planning that we'll be minus 430, and that's the £750,000 swing. But going back onto agenda item 7, obviously we can't vote on any of the recommendations, but I think it's wise to have that monthly conversation. What capacity have you got in your team to make this happen? Because obviously that's a lot of admin for bookings. I just want to make sure if we're going to do this and roll into it, that you feel, Matt, that you've got the right people to help book, that you know all the emails of the people. I'm not trying to patronise on camera, but I probably will. But all of those things, as Rachel pointed out, this is a lot of admin to get going, and it's if somebody's going well, is there an exit plan, or are they in it for the year? And if they're, as a couple of people have said, if it's not going well for them, is it instantly necking into a monthly? It's all of those considerations, because there are cycles in schools. I know that as an academy, I go September to September, and my lull is always around February. The picture looks bleak. It's a different time from when I was working in maintains. I know that all this picture doesn't look great, tends to happen at a different time, and is that sort of understanding of the peaks and troughs of where the money is. But I don't know what my question is, Matt, but do you have enough admin to get going?
We do. I think it's about developing the systems and processes, and I think I'm relatively new to this post. One of my school funding officers took up the post in July, I think it was. So we're sort of keen to do that. We've had conversations with colleagues to ensure. Clearly, I think this is it's taken everyone by surprise, and I think there's a conversation we're having within the borough about what's the support that's needed and the resources and the capacities needed to address this and pick this up. And I'll continue that with Nicholas and colleagues. Because clearly what we don't want it really to happen is to worsen, or if it does worsen, we understand it, we're aware of that in advance. And I think it's that sort of, as I say, go back to that slight surprise and shock that I think we all felt when we saw the figures been there. And again,
Thank you,
look to maximise the resources available.
One final comment from Rachel before we move on to our final paper.
Thank you. Can I just suggest, obviously we can't vote on this, but since you're meeting with heads and finance and various other people, perhaps for the next meeting we could have kind of a a structure of the process of how the format the accounts will be submitted in, how they will do it to make it consistent, how it will be followed up, and all kinds, something a little bit more concrete so that we can see all the details and the follow through?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very wise suggestion. Not that we can suggest. So, okay. We've had a apologies from Roy, who's left to go to another meeting. He said he wants to help in any way. And there's a nice message saying, appreciate all that we do. Your dedication and passion never goes unnoticed. And that's just what a lovely thing to hear from Roy. So our final paper, Matt, are you presenting again about high needs block? Is this agenda item 8?
I may well be.
Oh, Matt, welcome to the team. Thank you so
No,
much
no,
for presenting our third and final paper.
It's the papers there. There was a, as you can sort of see from the report, we're bringing back a discussion that sort of happened in March, I believe, that was deferred, and I think it was inadvertently missed off the June meeting. And I appreciate, I'm sort of understanding a little bit more of the context to see why this decision was deferred. I think the minutes talk about people were waiting for the Ofsted report. There was Ofsted inspection in February, but the question was about, are there appropriate arrangements for pupils with SEND and for children out of education or out of schools. Obviously, that Ofsted report has now been published, and I know that there's been discussions between the local authority and schools about how the impacts of that and what that means, and there's lots of things going on and sort of taking on what's required to do that. There is new provision in place. I know that Hawthorne School opened this month, and the new resource provision has also been made. So it's sort of part of that sort of response, I think, and therefore Schools Forum are sort of asked to take a view on this. It's not a we have the budgets were agreed and they're operational, but it is one of those requirements. It's one of those sort of elements of Schools Forum to give a view on these things. Does that make sense? We're bringing it back.
Thank you, Matt. And we can't vote on the recommendation, but we can certainly have a conversation because they between us. So, Rachel, your hand went up just a nanosecond before Keith.
I apologise for everything. So, so a couple of observations. Obviously, this was done in March, but since then, some of it's changed. So it refers to a 3.2% teaching pay rise, which is now 4%. Yeah, so that's going to affect the figures. There is something in 6.19 C where it's talking about pay in SRPs and learning support assistants, but it doesn't actually refer to the fact that some SRPs are also employing teachers. So that has an impact on their budget as well. I had one for Dwayne as well, actually. The telepresence robots, the little white dudes. At one point, there was going to be a bit of a working party in the review as to their effectiveness, and I'm not sure what the outcome of that was. And I think that was all of mine for now. I'll shut up. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you very much. 3 very valuable contributions. I'll let Dwayne gather her thoughts, unless you want to jump in now on those questions, Dwayne.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to Ollie, Rachel, in terms of the telepresence. What I know is that we bought 25, and at the close of play last year, I think 23 of them were out in schools. So they are being used left, right and centre. And I know some schools have even bought their own now. So, but I will speak to Ollie to say, in terms of the review, if I look at the safety valve and the savings that we attributed to implementing the robots, then we have absolutely met that.
I think from a non-budgeting perspective, I know there were some safeguarding concerns that were raised from the perspective of you have a child watching a classroom and we don't know who else is the other side of the camera potentially seeing inside the classroom.
So that hasn't been raised with me, Rachel, but we work with the company. I mean, these are rolled out nationally, to be honest with you. I mean, you know, during lockdown, when we were in lockdown, all children were taught, lots of children, I should say, not all. We tried to keep special schools open virtually. I also know schools, as a rule of thumb, outside of us, often when they have to put provision, will put online tuition in as well. The company that run the robots are exceptional. You know, any concerns that we've had, they've dealt with straight away.
Okay.
So, but I will speak to Ollie. But what I will say is the reviews we've had from schools and from families actually being allowed to keep the children integrated in their classroom and not in isolation has been second to none. But I'll ask
Okay,
Ollie to
fab.
pull a review together and feedback.
That would be a really
Brilliant.
useful paper and
Yeah.
a great question. It's a good challenge because it's something so new. If we know we're going to be supporting and championing it, it's absolutely right to get these things tied off. So thank you for that challenge and that response. Keith, your hand came up next.
Yeah, this has got to come back to Schools Forum when we're Curate. So I just wonder whether it would be sensible to take a little bit of time to look at the phrasing of the recommendations, because I suspect that when we are Curate, there'll be a number of head teachers and others who will be concerned at signing off on all these recommendations, particularly as it says in 2.5, you know, we are still moving in the wrong direction. There are still incredible pressures financially, but also in terms of how we feel in our schools, in terms of, you know, fulfilling our requirements in terms of SEND provision. So rather than this just coming straight back to Forum with exactly the same wording, is it worth taking a bit of time to just see if we can come up with a wording before we get to that meeting that people may feel happier, more comfortable with supporting?
Thank you.
Because we are working in, I think, increasingly challenging financial situation, particularly in respect to high needs. And I do think that statement needs to at least, well, more than nod to it, really. Rather than, I personally would feel it difficult to just say, yeah, I feel there are appropriate arrangements in place for the education pupils with SEND. It's very, very difficult. So let's have a look at that before we get to the meeting.
Can I come in on that, Liz? And
Oh,
Keith, I absolutely agree. You know, when I look at the narrative that was used, I don't think the narrative actually justifies the issue we've had in terms of local provision for our children. So I'm happy to relook at that with colleagues outside of here. And I think, you know, Keith, I think we recognise as a council that we need more provision locally. You know, we've advocated for that. You know, we have opened provision. I have got meetings set up to open more provisions. So, you know, but I don't want to take from the fact that we don't acknowledge that as a council, because we do and we have all along. And the Ofsted inspection report also acknowledged. So I do think there's something about the narrative and the wording that's been used in that report. And I'm happy outside of you to look at it.
I think we set up a Schools Forum subcommittee sitting with the people who are on there, and we thrash this out with what we would be happy to talk about. And obviously we'd still have the debate and people will still have their voting. I would suggest we set up. Jamie, am I allowed to recommend, even though I'm just chair for the meeting, to have a subgroup?
You can definitely recommend it. Technically, nothing's binding, but as long as people are happy to go along with it, then
Let's
it
have
can
a
be done.
meeting between now and December, I think would be, and then we'll all vote on that bit. Kate, your thoughts, and then back to Rachel.
Yeah, I just want to say I think the new Hawthorne Academy is a really good provision, and I think that is a success story, so that should be celebrated because that is useful. I think the around the Bucklers Park site, and you know, that still needs information around that. I know that was all put on hold, and that's as much as we know from, unless there's any more updated. But I do echo what Keith has said about the appropriate arrangement for pupils with SEND. I think it's not just about the children that are being sent out of county and out and costing a lot of money. It's about the appropriate provision within the mainstream schools. Is there you know, appropriate changing facilities for some of the children, or it's down to those basics that and training for staff as well, that I would suggest there's still more work that needs to be done in that area.
Sorry, I was on mute. Rachel.
Thank you. With a view to, as Keith said, reviewing this document, seeing as it was done in March and we're in another financial year now, could we relook at the numbers and update it? And in 6.9, it talks to the majority of costs are incurred are directly linked to support packages for individual pupils. Could we have some kind of breakdown on that so we can see, because they're separate, aren't they, from everything else that we're dealing with? So it'd be useful to be able to separate them out from the other numbers to see what money we're actually left with to deal with the rest of the provision. It'd be useful to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Matt, your hand came up.
I just want to check everyone's understanding this. So we've brought back the report from March. Obviously, things have moved on, actually, I think leaps and bounds in some aspects. And I'm happy to work with colleagues to sort of see where things are now and where they will be next year in terms of some of these numbers and pupil numbers and where the money's spent. So I'm not sure that reviewing a set of figures in March, closer to Christmas perhaps, is going to add much. It's about where do we take it to next, is my sort of thinking. We can have similar information and share that information, and I think that aspect has just been said in terms of the number of pupils and so on in each school and the funding and so forth is useful information. What I'm going to try and avoid is digging back to historic information in March when everything's changed subsequently. So, does that make sense as a sort of an exercise I want to avoid if I can?
I think we're all in agreement that we don't want to waste your time chasing numbers, but we do need, if we're going to be making decisions, we do want to have some of the more relevant information up to date, because it's 6 months on. So we had an AOB. Jamie, am I allowed to accept the AOB?
Yes,
Yep.
yes, that's no problem.
Okay.
It's not a decision, so it's not
it was just a request from some schools to know a little bit more about when money would flow in from any school who's been helping out with the transition hotel arrangement. I know the last I heard was that we were waiting for DFE paperwork.
We're waiting for Home Office. We have excellent relationships with the DFE. The Home Office is a little further apart from us. We've identified, my colleague, one of my team monitors which schools have which pupils, and we've got that sort of data. We've submitted I think the Home Office have now given us the form on which to claim. I think we're still waiting for them to process it. But once we get we are as keen to get it out to schools as we possibly can. And once it hits our bank account, we will pass it on immediately to schools.
We're not suggesting in any way. I didn't hear anybody about people thinking that you were keeping the money. We were potentially asking if Roy Bailey could put any help in. My last comment is thank you very much for everybody who came tonight. I know there's been lots of conversations about SEND in the background. I know that our local MP is meeting with lots of parents and actually in preparation for the SEND review nationally. I just want to say thank you for everybody giving their time to those things, because this is not an easy picture that we're facing in education. So for everybody who's given their time and their comments and their challenges tonight, I really do appreciate it. And there's hours of paperwork in the background, but it is right, as we are dealing with children's lives, to be sitting and giving time to this. So thank you so much for your contributions. Jamie, we have dates of future meetings. We have the next one, it's not even Christmas, so it's 18th of the 11th, 2025. Am I right, Jamie?
Yep, it's the 18th of November.
18th of November. Okay, so we will have a conversation between. So thank you so much for everybody's contributions. Oh, Kate.
Sorry, only a really quick one. Is there a process of coming onto the schools forum or not? Like if I want to be on it, or
yes, there is. We can talk about it offline if that's all right.
okay, perfect.
Jamie, you okay for stopping the recording?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Liz.